proceed? Your Honor, revenge begins with betrayal. Clearly, Sawyer Smith is not entirely blameless. She betrayed her best friend, ending their 8-year friendship and later getting that same friend fired. But unlike this friend, she did not break the law. At the beginning of this trial, my colleagues and I set out to prove that the defendant, Reagan Klein, is guilty of criminal threat and false report of emergency. And we have. First, count 2, criminal threat. The defendant's comment on Sawyer Smith's post said, "You deserve to die. I'm going to get you for this. You just wait. I hate you. When you're dead, no one will even miss you, you monstrous slime of a person. You think you can stick me with a $34,000 lawsuit and just get away with it? Watch your back, Sawyer. I'm coming for you." A statement that clearly indicates a serious intention and the immediate prospect of harming the person. And yet the prosecution must only prove that this statement was meant as a threat, even if the defendant did not mean to actually carry it out. Devastated from being betrayed and distraught from the prospect of being sued for $34,000, the defendant, Reagan Klein, burdened with student loans, did indeed willfully threaten to take revenge on Miss Smith because she was angry and desperate. And after reading this threat, Miss Smith was in a sustained state of fear. Knowing not only what the defendant did to her, but also what she had done to provoke the defendant, Miss Smith had good reason to be, and was, terrified. Second, count 1, false report of emergency, has 4 elements. The prosecution must prove that the defendant, 1, reported to the authorities that an emergency exists, 2, knew that the report was false, 3, knew that the response to the report would likely cause great harm, and 4, that great harm was sustained by someone due to the defendant's false report. It is undisputed that great harm was sustained by Miss Smith in breaking her femur, and that whoever made the report knew that it was false. The questions we must answer today are, did Reagan Klein make the false report, and if so, did she understand that doing so could cause great harm? The prosecution has proven today that the answer to both of these questions is a definitive yes. There is only one person with enough motive to swat Miss Smith, Reagan Klein. Miss Smith ended their 8-year friendship for her social media status, got the defendant fired from her job and nearly sued for $34,000, knowing that the defendant struggled with loans, and then publicly gloated over doing this. Your Honor, it is no coincidence that on the same day the defendant, who had been defaming Miss Smith for weeks, was fired, she threatened Miss Smith, and that same night, Miss Smith was swatted. Now, Cameron Holmes has testified to the defendant's means and opportunity. The text tip was sent from Miss Holmes' flip phone at 9:08 p.m., but Miss Holmes is downstairs picking up the pizza at 9:08 p.m., leaving only 2 people upstairs with her flip phone when the text tip was sent, Reagan Klein and Marlo Patterson. But Marlo Patterson was occupied with the phone call. This leaves one person who had both the means and the opportunity, Reagan Klein. And sure enough, when Miss Holmes came back upstairs, she saw the defendant closing the phone. And yet the defendant claims that she looked at the phone to only check the time and denied any knowledge of the tip. But Officer Lopez has given a testimony that directly contradicts the defendant's claim. When Officer Lopez looked at the flip phone screen, she immediately found that the screen was still on the text tip sent at 9:08. If Reagan Klein really did check the time at 9:11, she must have seen the tip. So why would she lie? The answer can only be that the defendant herself sent that text tip. Furthermore, in Dr. Dakota Chung's expert opinion, the author of the text tip is Reagan Klein. Both Dr. Dakota Chung and the defense's Dr. Blake Williams concluded that the features of the text tip are the most distinctive of Reagan Klein. The defense's Sam Colossian even confirmed that from a news story, the defendant undoubtedly understood the potential harm that swatting could cause. Your Honor, the defendant, Reagan Klein, is the only person with the means, motive, and opportunity, and is further indicated by expert analysis to be the author of the text tip. However, the defense would have you believe that Reagan Klein is not the only person, that Cameron Holmes is even a more likely culprit than the defendant. The defendant who claims that Ms. Holmes wasn't actually downstairs for 10 minutes, but came back around 9:05. But Your Honor, considering the amount of time and difficulty it would take to type out all 400 characters on the number keypad of a flip phone while holding the pizza, and the fact that Ms. Holmes would have to think of the entire message, make sure there are no misspellings, and imitate the defendant's writing style, as Dr. Blake Williams alluded to, all in the span of a few minutes to send a tip at 9:08, makes the defense's story not only unreasonable, but impossible. The court has been provided with the defendant's means, Cameron Holmes' unattended phone, her motive, revenge on the friend who betrayed her, and her opportunity,
30 seconds.
Marlo Patterson's phone call, and Cameron Holmes' absence. Your Honor, for these reasons, the only verdict beyond a reasonable doubt is that the defendant, Reagan Klein, is guilty of criminal threat and false report of emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you have an opportunity to give your closing argument. You may begin.
Before I proceed, may I rearrange the exhibits?
Yes.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll just start by stating the obvious. This case is a farce. In reality, this case shouldn't even come to trial. But the difference between reality and the distorted reality presented by the prosecution tonight is that while Ms. Klein's actions might have been mean, rude, hurtful, and maybe even a bit vindictive, they were not criminal. Your Honor, addressing count 2 first, to convict my client of making a criminal threat, the prosecution has to have proven 6 separate elements. I'm going to focus on the ones that they were furthest from proving. Along with the 5 other elements, today the prosecution had to prove that when Ms. Klein commented on Sawyer Smith's post, that she intended her comment to be understood as a threat. Your Honor, today you heard testimony from Marlo Patterson, who stated that the group of friends was just messing with Ms. Smith, and that they would never actually want to hurt her. You also heard from my client herself, who testified that in no way did she really mean for her comment to be understood as a threat. Your Honor, she had just been fired with a $34,000 lawsuit, and in the heat of the moment, with all of her emotions clouding her judgment, she commented something mean and regretted it. In no way did she truly mean for her comment to be understood as a threat, and the prosecution has failed to prove otherwise beyond a reasonable doubt. And Your Honor, tonight the prosecution argued that Ms. Klein, she didn't post anything without Marlo Patterson looking over it. But Your Honor, this was a heat of the moment decision. She wasn't looking back. She was upset and hurt. She commented this and regretted it, Your Honor. Tonight, the prosecution also had to prove that after reading Ms. Klein's comment, Ms. Smith was in sustained fear. And Your Honor, Ms. Smith testified that she was afraid. But Ms. Smith replied to Ms. Klein's comment, laughed out loud, as if, "You're done now, bye." And while she claimed that she was trying to keep up her image for her followers, Your Honor, if you look at her actions, she went back home alone and lay in bed watching a movie. And she didn't contact the police. And she claimed that she was trying to keep up her image for her followers, Your Honor, but her followers wouldn't have known if she contacted the police. And even if you believe that Ms. Smith was afraid, she told Officer Lopez that she was, that was after the fact, Your Honor. That was after she fell down the stairs, after the SWAT team kicked in her door, after she broke the largest, strongest bone in her body. Your Honor, any reasonable person would have been afraid at that point. But count 2 requires that Ms. Smith was in sustained fear because of Ms. Klein's comment. And the prosecution has failed to prove that fact beyond a reasonable doubt. As for count 1, Your Honor, the prosecution has to have proven another 5 separate elements. But 4 of the elements don't even matter because the prosecution failed to prove the most important one, that Ms. Klein actually sent the text to tip. Your Honor, on the night of August 14th, there were 3 people in Ms. Klein's apartment. At around the time that the text to tip was sent, Ms. Klein was sitting down at the upstairs table. Marlo Patterson was on the phone with his sister, and Cameron Holmes was on her phone. Your Honor, at about 9 p.m., Cameron Holmes went downstairs to pick up the pizza, and as Ms. Klein testified, she came back up no more than 5 minutes later. At that point, she checked her phone, Your Honor. Your Honor, tonight the prosecution argued that Ms. Klein would have seen the text to tip if it was there. But Your Honor, Ms. Klein testified that after she was done on the phone, Ms. Klein checked the phone, or excuse me, Ms. Holmes checked the phone. Your Honor, Ms. Holmes would have been the last one to see the text to tip. And Your Honor, tonight you heard from Marlo Patterson that Ms. Holmes had grown jealous of my client and even said that the summer would have been a lot more fun if they could just get her out of the picture. Ms. Holmes also testified that Ms. Smith deserved to be humiliated by the catfishing. Your Honor, who uses the word deserve most? Tonight in testimony, it was Cameron Holmes. Your Honor, in the writings, it was Cameron Holmes. And even in the text-to-tip, Your Honor, the word deserve. And Your Honor, while it is the defense's position that Cameron Holmes did most likely send a text-to-tip, whether you believe that or not doesn't matter, because the prosecution failed to prove that it was Miss Klein beyond a reasonable doubt. Tonight, the prosecution also argued that Miss Klein would have retained the idea of swatting from the news program that she watched with Miss Coloster. But Your Honor, there were 3 people who saw that program. Your Honor, Cameron Holmes and Marlo Patterson were also present. There were 3 people who saw that program. There were 3 people in Miss Klein's apartment when the text-to-tip was sent. Yet only one person's interview was actually given any merit by Officer Keegan Lopez. That was Cameron Holmes, Your Honor, the person who owned the phone and had the most opportunity and motive to send the text-to-tip. Your Honor, if this is not enough evidence, tonight you heard testimony from expert witness Dr. Blake Williams, who testified that in her expert opinion, it was most likely Cameron Holmes who sent the text-to-tip, trying to disguise her writing to appear as if it were my client's. And furthermore, Your Honor, Sawyer Smith testified that Miss Klein never posted on her social media. And the writing analysis took place based on social media posts, Your Honor. Therefore, the only social media posts that the doctors analyzed were the posts from the Catfish account, Your Honor, where both Miss Klein, Marlo Patterson, and Cameron Holmes contributed. And Your Honor, Dr. Chung failed to analyze writing samples from more than 2 people, completely disregarding the fact that it could have been anyone other than Miss Klein or Cameron Holmes, such as Marlo Patterson, for example. Your Honor, if there are 2 or more reasonable interpretations of a piece of circumstantial evidence, one pointing towards guilt and one to innocence, the trier of fact is required to accept the interpretation that points to Miss Klein's innocence. For example, both expert witnesses analyzed the same data and arrived at 2 separate conclusions. Therefore, the conclusion that Miss Klein was not the author of the tip must be accepted. Your Honor, based on this, and the fact that the prosecution has failed to meet their burden of proof and proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Miss Klein is guilty, the defense respectfully requests a verdict of not guilty on both counts.
Thank you, counsel. Rebuttal argument from the people.
Yes, Your Honor. As for criminal threat, Ms. Smith only responded the way she did to protect her social media status, which to her was her life. Furthermore, Your Honor, a person does not have to call the police to be afraid. And as for false report and emergency, the defense brought up or alluded to Calcum 224. That states when there are more than one reasonable conclusion from the evidence, we must take the one that points to innocence. For Your Honor, today we only have one. Even if Cameron Holmes had the motive, it was physically impossible for her to have the opportunity. The defense tried to allude to the fact that Ms. Holmes could have written the tip before going downstairs, but Your Honor, before going downstairs, all 3 friends were preoccupied with watching TV while the phone was plugged into the wall. And the defense has failed to explain why Ms. Holmes would not take the opportunity of being sent downstairs to privately send the tip and instead left her phone upstairs in the open where both Marlo and Reagan could easily check it. Your Honor, for these reasons, the people ask that you find the defendant guilty of criminal threat and false report of emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. And defense rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
The prosecution argued that Cameron Holmes wouldn't have had the opportunity to send a text to him. But Your Honor, even though it was 400 characters and it was typed out on a numerical keypad on a flip phone, Your Honor, Cameron Holmes, or as you heard Marlo Patterson testify, Cameron Holmes was on her phone throughout the night, and she would have had the opportunity to type that text-to-tip out in bits and pieces. And furthermore, Your Honor, the prosecution stated that the text-to-tip was received at 9:08, meaning that when Cameron came back up the stairs, after 5 minutes, she could have sent that text-to-tip that she had written out throughout the duration of the night. And that is reasonable doubt right there. Based on this and the fact that the prosecution has failed to prove that it was Miss Klein beyond a reasonable doubt, again, the defense respectfully requests a verdict of not guilty on both counts.
Thank you, counsel.